It's currently the dead of winter in the Northern Hemisphere, and it is freaking cold. Today is the first day out of the past week or so that we have even approached freezing. We've been getting negative temperatures, pipes freezing, animal waters frozen solid, the wells spring a leak, you name it. We're getting it. So what do you think is the best thing that you can do to alleviate all of our cold woes? Canning soup, of course. Split pea soup, to be specific. There are a lot of recipes for split pea soup out there. Some of them are really good. Some of them taste like split pea soup. Growing up, my Uncle Mick always used to make split pea soup, and it was one of my favorite things in the entire world. However, his was the only one I ever liked. I couldn't stand any other ones until I found this recipe. The recipe that I'm going to be canning today is out of this book. It is the complete book, the Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving, and it has some very incredibly delectable recipes in there, including split pea soup or habitant soup. I don't know what the heck that is, but anyways, what I call it is delicious. The nice thing about canning soup is that you get warmed up twice. The first time you get to warm your house with a nice little toasty canner, and it's putting out its steam, and it's so warming and it's so cozy, especially on days like today when everything is just so cold. I just need warmth, okay? And then after that, you get 10 separate meals of warming up your bones. So it's fantastic. It's a win-win. When I made this recipe, I doubled it. The original recipe makes 5 pints or 2 quart jars, and I doubled it just to make it worth my time. So the original recipe calls for 2 cups of dried split peas, 8 cups of water, 1.5 cups of sliced carrots, 1 cup of chopped onion, 1 cup of diced cooked ham, 1 bay leaf, 1/4 teaspoon of ground allspice, and salt and freshly ground pepper to taste. I'm a huge fan of kind of layering flavors and just getting the most amount of flavor to a dish that you can possibly get. And to me, it seemed like a waste to put water in here when I could put beef broth in there. I substituted homemade beef broth for the water, and it's amazing. It is definitely what you want to do with this recipe. You could substitute any kind of broth. You could even put water in there if you want to. But for me, I had a bunch of beef broth going on the stove, so it just made sense to add that in there. With this recipe, you cook everything ahead of time and you make a soup and then you portion it into the jars. It's not one of those like assemble in the jar kind of recipes. So the first thing you need to do is add the split peas to a large stock pot, and then top it off with either water or broth, whatever you're going to use for this particular recipe. And you're gonna bring it up to a boil, lower it down to a nice simmer, and let it simmer for an hour or until the peas are nice and soft. While the peas are boiling, you wanna go ahead and chop up all of your vegetables. You wanna get them kind of just like a nice dice to them. You can probably about 1/4 inch, I would say, give or take. You can do whatever you choose with that one. But you're gonna cut up the carrots, the onions, and the ham. You can also prepare all of this ahead of time and have it all ready to go when it fits your schedule. But for me and my schedule, it just made sense to take that hour when everything was boiling to chop everything up into little pieces. And while everything is coming up to a boil, you want to make sure that your jars are prepared. You want to make sure that your canner is getting warmed up. When the soup is finished cooking, you want to make sure that you're ladling it into hot jars and putting it into the hot canner. So you need everything to kind of be warmed up right around the same time. Once the peas are nice and soft and your hour is up, you can do one of 2 things. You can leave it as it is, and it's gonna have a little bit of texture to it. It's definitely not what I would say like chunky or anything, but it just has a little bit more texture than just a pureed soup. Or you can puree the soup. At this point, you can puree the soup either in a blender or you can use your wand mixer. I asked my husband what he would prefer because he's the one who's going to be eating most of these, and he wanted me to leave them whole. Then you're going to add the carrots, onions, ham, bay leaf, and allspice to the pan. Give it a nice stir. You want to make sure everything is well combined and dispersed throughout. And then you're going to bring it up to a simmer again and let it simmer for 30 minutes. And once that 30 minutes is up, it's time to ladle these into the jars. So you want to take all of your hot jars out of the canner, put them on the counter, and start ladling them in. I don't use a ladle. I use a Pyrex measuring cup, but one thing you should know about this particular recipe is that it's very difficult to do that. You want to make sure to stir it in between each one because everything the peas settle on the bottom and the veggies and the ham go and float up to the top. So just make sure you're giving it a stir in between each one. And based on the consistency of it, it also has a tendency to kind of bounce out of the jar. So just be extra vigilant when you're portioning these guys out, because it can be kind of a pain and you're going to have a huge mess on your hands. When I first started to put the split pea soup into the jars, my original intention was to fill up each of the jars about halfway with the solids and then add the liquids. That just didn't work for me personally. I don't know if it'll work for you, but give it a try if you want to. Otherwise, just do what I did and use the Pyrex mixing jar. I keep calling it a Pyrex mixing jar. Just use the Pyrex measuring cup, I can't think of the word, and spread it out among the jars. And this particular recipe also has a very, very much a tendency to stick very solidly onto the rims of the jars. So when you are wiping the rims of the jars with the vinegar, scrub-a-dub-dub. I will tell you what, you really need to scrub these. And if you don't make sure to get off all of the little remnants, that the peas just really stick on there really hard. So just make sure you're giving it a really, really solid effort and getting everything off of the rims if you want to make sure that you get a seal on all of your jars. It's a pain in the butt, but I promise it's worth it. With each of these jars, one by one, I just wiped them down with the vinegar, added the lid, added the ring, and put it into the canner. It just seemed like the best way to do it on this particular recipe. And again, you want to make sure that your canner is nice and warm, not hot, not boiling, but just warm. Once all of the jars are loaded into the canner, you want to make sure to inspect your lid, inspect the gasket, make sure that everything is okay with that one, look through the vent pipe, make sure that's working. If you have a lid lock, make sure that that thing toggles. And then you put the lid on there, crank the heat up to high, and let it go until it starts to really, really vent steam. And if you have a lid lock, as soon as that thing pops up, the steam starts to really build up inside of the canner. And then at that point, you can usually start to set the timer for 10 minutes to let it vent for 10 minutes. You really want to make sure that you're letting it vent for 10 minutes because during that stage, all the sputters and everything that you hear coming out of the canner, that is the air that's leaving along with the steam. And if you don't get all of the air out of the canner before you put the weight on there, it will not get to the correct temperature. The air will inhibit it from getting hot enough. The airspace in there needs to be taken up 100% by steam or it cannot get to the required temperature. Once the 10-minute timer is up, put the weight on there, let it start to come up to a jiggle. Once it starts to jiggle, set your timer. For the pint-sized jars, it's 75 minutes. If you're doing quart-sized jars, it's 90 minutes. And just to answer one question here, I know that ham is one of the ingredients that are typically that you're not supposed to can. However, they have clarified that you can put it in small amounts inside of recipes, but you don't want to do like a whole jar of ham. And the reason for that is the curing process makes it a denser meat, which means you can't guarantee that the heat will penetrate all the way through and get to the required temperature for the required amount of time in order to ensure that there's no botulism inside of the jar. I hope that makes sense. Once the timer is up, go ahead and turn off the stove and walk away and wait until everything is down to zero pressure. If you have a lid lock on there, make sure that thing has dropped first and then give it a few more minutes, take your weight off, give it a few minutes, loosen the lid, give it a few minutes, and then after that you can start to take the jars out of the canner. This particular recipe is a little bit funky. It's gonna have all this separation to it, but I canned this yesterday, and so it is perfectly okay for me to go ahead and give it a little shake to make it look nice and pretty on the shelves. And you just give it a nice shake, and then it's just this beautiful, speckled, glorious split pea soup on your counter. Yesterday when I canned this with a little bit of extra that we had, I was able to get a little taste test out of hubby. Robert has agreed to do a taste test for us. I've already tried it. I will not sway his opinion on it in any way whatsoever. It's just the leftover sauce, and then we added a little bit of ham to it. You like it?
Thank you, wife.
Aren't you glad I didn't add more salt? You're welcome.
Yeah, it's perfect.
It's the perfect amount of salt with the ham and the broth. I think it was perfect.
I just need one of your rolls with this too.
There's just a couple. Oh, you already ate them?
I ate them already.
Oh, yeah, it'll take me hours to get more.
Okay. Well, whenever you're ready with some more rolls on it. But I'll have this finished anyway. So.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah, that's well worth it. Yes,
I agree.
I believe so. Split pea soup.
Split pea and ham soup.
Oh yeah. Cool. It's good.
Thank you. I had already tasted it in the process, so I knew that this tasted delicious, and I know that you guys are going to absolutely love it too. It is the most savory, delicious, complex flavor. It is so difficult to put your finger on it, but if you have never had amazing split pea soup, you've got to try this recipe. It is absolutely amazing, and there is nothing going to warm you up better, faster, and more thoroughly than a delicious, nice, thick, creamy split pea soup. Once you make this split pea soup, if you're looking for another option that you can make as a nice, delicious canned soup recipe, check out this video right here, and it'll take you to the right place where you can get all kinds of inspiration. Peace out, sauerkraut.